The Chosen One. Prophecy and origins from the dawn of the Jedi Order. A prophecy was whispered among the ancient masters. A prophecy of a singular being, born of the Force itself, who would one day bring balance to its chaotic nature. This was the legend of the Chosen One. It was a story told in hushed tones, a beacon of hope in times of darkness. But what if the legend was a burden, a crushing weight of expectation placed upon the shoulders of a small boy? This is where our story begins, not in the hallowed halls of the Jedi Temple, but in the sun-scorched sands of a desolate desert planet. Tatooine is a world of heat, dust, and slavery. For 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker, it was a prison. He was not a hero, not a Jedi, but a slave to the cruel junk dealer Watto. Yet, even in this oppressive environment, Anakin was anything but ordinary. His hands, though small, possessed an almost supernatural aptitude for machines. He could fix anything, from rusted pod engines to broken droids. This wasn't just a talent. It was an innate connection to the physical world, a manifestation of the Force flowing through him. His compassion was equally boundless. He was fiercely protective of his mother, Shmi, a fellow slave who was the center of his universe. Their bond was unbreakable, and his greatest fear was losing her. This fear, born from his powerlessness, would become the fatal flaw that the Sith would one day exploit. Anakin's life changed forever with the arrival of two strangers, a wise Jedi Master named Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Qui-Gon immediately sensed a powerful, unusual presence in the boy. He recognized the raw, untapped potential, a connection to the Force unlike anything he had ever encountered. He tested Anakin and discovered something astonishing. His midi-chlorian count was off the charts, far exceeding even that of Master Yoda. For Qui-Gon, this was proof. This boy was the chosen one of the prophecy. He was meant to be the one to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. Qui-Gon's discovery, however, was met with skepticism from the Jedi Council. They were concerned by Anakin's age and the deep attachment he held for his mother. The Jedi Code strictly forbade such attachments, viewing them as a path to the dark side. They saw fear and anger, where Qui-Gon saw a pure heart and immense potential. The Jedi believed the boy was too old to be trained, that his emotions were too deeply ingrained to be shed in favor of Jedi discipline. This moment is crucial. It's the first of many times the Jedi would fail to understand Anakin's unique nature, trying to force him into a mold he was never meant to fit. The Council's rigid adherence to their doctrine created an immediate and irreparable rift. Anakin's life on Tatooine had already taught him about the harsh realities of existence. He had experienced loss and pain, but also the love of his mother. He had no concept of the Jedi Code or the philosophy of non-attachment. All he knew was that Qui-Gon was offering him freedom, not just for himself, but for his mother. When Watto would only allow one to leave, Anakin was faced with a gut-wrenching choice. He chose his own freedom, promising his mother he would return for her. That promise, a mix of hope and the terrible guilt of leaving her behind, would haunt him for the rest of his life. The journey to Coruscant was a whirlwind for the boy from the desert. The bustling, vibrant cityscape was a stark contrast to the endless dunes he called home. But the Jedi Temple was another world entirely. It was a place of serene, almost cold discipline. He was taken from the arms of his mother and placed into a new, sterile environment where he was expected to forsake all his past connections and emotions. This transition was a brutal shock. He was no longer Anakin, the son of Shmi, but Anakin, the prophesied chosen one. The weight of this identity was immense, and from the very beginning, he carried a burden no child should have to bear. In this first chapter of his life, Anakin's fate was a collision of destiny and free will. He was born with an extraordinary gift, identified by a prophecy, and burdened with an expectation he couldn't possibly comprehend. The stage was set for a tragedy of galactic proportions. The Jedi, in their wisdom, feared his attachments. But in their fear, they failed to recognize that those very attachments were the source of his profound capacity for love. A love that could have been his greatest strength if nurtured correctly. The Jedi's rigid, unbending rules and their initial skepticism would ultimately pave the way for his future downfall, proving that sometimes even the most noble of institutions can be blind to the truth right in front of them. The stage is set. Anakin Skywalker has arrived, yet the prophecy itself was a double-edged sword, a narrative trap waiting to be sprung. Qui-Gon, with his unwavering faith in the boy, set him on a path that no one, not even he, fully understood. The Jedi Council, in their resistance, believed they were protecting the Jedi Order, but their cold logic and fear of the unknown pushed Anakin further into a corner. They saw his fear of loss as a weakness, a gateway to the dark side, when in reality, it was a profound testament to his capacity for love. No other Jedi had a mother to lose. No other Jedi was born a slave. Anakin's entire life was defined by the struggle to overcome immense, soul-crushing loss, and the Jedi's solution was to tell him to simply let go of what he had never had a chance to hold on to. The Jedi's reaction to Anakin was a fundamental miscalculation. They saw a powerful Force user and attempted to fit him into the rigid, ancient framework of their order. They failed to see the boy who had a heart too big for their sterile temple. His compassion for droids, his love for his mother, his quick wit and rebellious spirit, these were not flaws to be corrected, but unique qualities to be understood. Qui-Gon, a maverick in his own right, understood this instinctively. His final plea to the Council to train Anakin, followed by his death at the hands of Darth Maul, left the boy in the care of Obi-Wan Kenobi, a master who, for all his love, was fundamentally a creature of the Jedi system. Obi-Wan's training would be a constant, often frustrating, push and pull between his duty to the Jedi Code and his growing affection for his headstrong Padawan as Anakin began his training. The ghost of Qui-Gon's prophecy loomed large. He wasn't just a Padawan learning the ways of the Force. He was the Chosen One. This title, whether he embraced it or not, set him apart from his peers and fueled a burning need to prove himself. It created a deep-seated insecurity and a desire for approval from a council that viewed him with suspicion. He felt the immense power within him, but the Jedi's teachings of restraint and patience often felt at odds with his impulsive nature. This internal conflict between his inherent power and the disciplined path he was forced to walk would define his entire arc. The first chapter of Anakin's life is a masterclass in tragic irony. The very qualities that made him unique and powerful, his compassion, his attachments, his passionate spirit, were the very things the Jedi tried to suppress. Their failure to accept him for who he was created the perfect environment for the one person who would. That person, an insidious politician watching from the shadows, saw not a problem to be solved, but a weapon to be forged. The seeds of Anakin's destruction were sown not by the dark side itself, but by the light side's inability to fully embrace the darkness within him. He was a boy caught between two worlds, a slave who gained his freedom but lost his family, and a hero who was destined to become the galaxy's greatest villain. Chapter 2: The Padawan's Burden. A different kind of Jedi. With the sands of Tatooine behind him, Anakin Skywalker's new life as a Jedi Padawan began. Under the tutelage of Obi-Wan Kenobi, the young boy was thrust into a world of discipline and tradition. This was a stark contrast to his free-spirited nature. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was a place of serene meditation and rigorous training. But for Anakin, it was also a crucible of internal conflict. His training was not just about mastering the Force and lightsaber combat. It was a constant battle to suppress the very emotions that had defined his life. He found the cold, clinical nature of the Jedi Code to be a direct assault on his humanity. This fundamental philosophical difference would sow the seeds of his future rebellion. The relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan was unlike any other Jedi pairing. It was less a traditional master and apprentice bond and more a complex tapestry of brotherly affection, mutual respect, and fiery conflict. Obi-Wan, a by-the-book Jedi, struggled to contain Anakin's impulsive nature and unconventional methods. He constantly preached patience and adherence to the Jedi Code. Anakin, in turn, often saw his master's caution as a lack of boldness. Their dynamic was a constant push and pull, a blend of exasperation and deep, abiding love. Obi-Wan recognized Anakin's immense power and genius, but he also feared the boy's volatile emotions, a fear that mirrored the Jedi Council's own. He was tasked with training the Chosen One, a responsibility he felt unprepared for. This tension defined their early years together. Anakin's struggle with the Jedi Code was a central theme of his early life. The Code's prohibition against attachment was a direct assault on the very foundation of his being. He loved his master, Obi-Wan, and he cherished the memory of his mother, Shmi. To a Jedi, these attachments were weaknesses, potential gateways to the dark side. For Anakin, they were the source of his compassion and his humanity. He simply could not reconcile the idea of letting go of the people he loved, a concept that seemed cold and alien to him. This internal schism created a hidden life for Anakin. While publicly he was a promising Jedi Padawan, privately he was a young man wrestling with a deep sense of loneliness and a secret desire for the family and connection the Jedi denied him. This duality would lead him to form clandestine friendships and connections, most notably with Padma Amidala, whom he had met as a boy on Tatooine. Their burgeoning romance would become the ultimate test of his allegiance to the Jedi Order and his deepest emotional desires. As the years passed, Anakin's prodigious talent became undeniable. He was a natural pilot, an unparalleled tactician, and a ferocious lightsaber duelist. His skills often bordered on the reckless, yet they consistently yielded success. In the early days of the Clone Wars, which began to erupt across the galaxy, he earned a reputation as a war hero. He was a general who fought alongside his troops, earning their loyalty and respect. He was loved by the public and praised by politicians, including the ever-present and increasingly influential Senator Palpatine. Palpatine, in a masterful display of manipulation, recognized Anakin's need for validation. He showered him with praise and attention, subtly driving a wedge between him and the Jedi Council. The Council often viewed his unorthodox victories with suspicion. A pivotal moment in this chapter of his life, and a dark foreshadowing of his future, was the death of his mother. Having a terrible premonition of her suffering, Anakin journeyed back to Tatooine, breaking Jedi protocol to find her. He found her captured and tortured by Tusken Raiders. She died in his arms. In that moment, all the pain, anger, and fear he had been forced to suppress erupted into a torrent of raw emotion. The grief and rage were so overwhelming that he slaughtered not just the raiders who killed his mother, but the entire village. Men, women, and children. This act was his first major moral compromise. It was a descent into pure, unadulterated vengeance. When he confessed his actions to Padme, he was filled with shame and self-loathing, yet he felt no remorse for the Tusken Raiders. He had let his emotions consume him. The dark side had offered a fleeting, terrible catharsis. He had tasted its power, and it had left him feeling both powerful and utterly lost. This event solidified the central conflict of Anakin's existence. His love for his mother had not saved her. In fact, it had led him down a path of unspeakable violence. He returned to the Jedi Temple, his secret burden weighing on him, more isolated than ever before. He was the chosen one who had just committed an act of mass murder, an act born not of malice, but of a broken heart. The Jedi had tried to teach him to let go, but he couldn't. His inability to do so led to a moment of pure darkness. This was the beginning of the end, a tragic turning point where the hero in the making began to fracture. It set the stage for the darkness that would eventually consume him. Beyond the events of the films, the animated series Star Wars, The Clone Wars provided an even richer look into this period of Anakin's life. It showed him not just as a Jedi Knight, but as a commander, a strategist, and a reluctant mentor. The introduction of his Padawan, Ahsoka Tano, added a new layer of complexity to his character. Ahsoka was assigned to him by Yoda. This was a move designed to force Anakin to mature and take on responsibility. Their relationship quickly became one of the most endearing in the Star Wars canon. Anakin saw much of himself in Ahsoka's defiance and impulsiveness. His affection for her was immediate and profound. He was fiercely protective, a quality that again flew in the face of Jedi teachings. Through Ahsoka, Anakin learned to temper his own recklessness. She, in turn, learned from his unorthodox brilliance. She was the sister he never had, a true confidant. Their bond became another attachment that reinforced his belief that connection was not a weakness, but a strength. His experiences during the Clone Wars further eroded his faith in the Jedi Council. He saw the hypocrisy of a peacekeeping order, leading a galaxy-wide war. He witnessed the moral compromises they were forced to make. He saw the cold, strategic decisions that often resulted in heavy casualties. His admiration for the clones, whom he saw not as disposable units, but as individual soldiers with their own personalities and lives, put him at odds with the Jedi Council's more detached approach to the conflict. He was a general who got his hands dirty, a leader who felt the loss of every soldier. This empathy, a core part of his character, was another trait the Jedi tried to suppress. It made him a more effective and beloved leader, but it also made him vulnerable to the pain and loss that defined the war. The political machinations of the war also play a critical role in his downfall. Palpatine, in his role as Supreme Chancellor, was a constant presence in Anakin's life. He was a father figure, a confidant, and an admirer who saw no fault in Anakin's methods. When the Jedi Council would lecture him on his arrogance or impulsiveness, Palpatine would praise him for his boldness and his success. He was the voice of approval that Anakin craved, an insidious influence that slowly turned Anakin against the Jedi. Palpatine's flattery was a balm for the wounds inflicted by the Council's suspicion. It created a bond of trust that was nearly unbreakable. Anakin began to confide in Palpatine about his deepest fears and frustrations, inadvertently giving the Sith Lord all the information he needed to execute his master plan. The final element of this chapter is the growing sense of loneliness that defined Anakin. He was isolated from his peers by his raw power and the Chosen One title. He was isolated from the Jedi Council by his rebellious nature, and he was isolated from the rest of the galaxy by his secret life as Padme's husband. This isolation made him the perfect target for Palpatine's manipulation. He was a young man with a monumental destiny. He had a profound capacity for love and a heartbreaking fear of loss. He was caught in a system that taught him to deny everything that made him special. The stage was set for the ultimate tragedy, a fall not of pure evil, but of a good man who, in his desperate attempt to protect those he loved, was tricked into becoming the very monster he feared. Chapter 3: The Clone Wars. A hero's rise and a shadow's spread. The galaxy was on the brink of war. The rise of the Separatist Alliance, led by the enigmatic Count Dooku, plunged the Republic into a conflict that would change everything. The Jedi. For centuries, the Guardians of Peace were now forced to become generals in a vast military machine. For Anakin Skywalker, the Clone Wars was not just a conflict. It was his proving ground. He rose from a promising Padawan to a celebrated war hero, a figurehead of the Republic's might. Yet, with every victory he secured, a deeper shadow began to creep into his soul. Anakin's leadership style was a stark departure from the traditional Jedi approach. Where masters like Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi adhered to cautious strategy and battlefield discipline, Anakin was an unconventional, even reckless commander. He fought alongside his clone troopers, not above them. He earned their loyalty through action and shared risk, not through rank or status. To him, the clones were not just a faceless army. They were individuals with their own lives and personalities. He called them by name, listened to their concerns, and often put himself in harm's way to save them. This earned him the fierce loyalty of his men, a loyalty that would remain long after his fall. This unique bond with his troops further distanced him from the Jedi Council, who saw this attachment as a flaw in his judgment. This wasn't just a difference in command style. It was a fundamental philosophical divergence. The Jedi viewed the clones as tools of the Republic, but Anakin saw them as brothers. This empathy made him a more effective and beloved leader, but it also made him vulnerable to the pain and loss that defined the war. The war also introduced Anakin to his own Padawan, Ahsoka Tano. The introduction of Ahsoka, a young and feisty Togruta, was a test of Anakin's maturity. Yoda assigned her to him, hoping the responsibility of a mentor would temper his impulsive nature. It worked, but not in the way the Council expected. Anakin and Ahsoka's relationship was that of a big brother and a little sister. He taught her to trust her instincts and to bend the rules when necessary. She, in turn, forced him to be more patient and responsible. Their dynamic, full of playful banter and deep mutual respect. was the closest thing to a family Anakin had ever known since leaving his mother. Ahsoka became a mirror for his own personality, a reflection of his best qualities: his compassion, his ingenuity, and his courage. Her presence also deepened his understanding of attachment. He was fiercely protective of her, a sentiment that the Jedi Code would have deemed a weakness. For Anakin, it was a source of great strength. He saw her as proof that a Jedi could have attachments and still be a force for good. He was convinced that their bond made them stronger, a defiance of the very code he was supposed to uphold. While Anakin was busy becoming a military legend, he was also wrestling with the moral ambiguities of the war. He witnessed the brutality and senseless loss firsthand. The Jedi, once paragons of peace, were now involved in covert operations, targeted assassinations, and total warfare. These compromises chipped away at Anakin's faith in the Jedi Council's wisdom. He saw their hypocrisy. They preached peace while leading a war, and they lectured him on his attachments while forming strategic bonds with politicians and clones. This erosion of trust was a slow but steady process, fueled by his own experiences and observations. The Jedi's decision-making often seemed cold and detached, a stark contrast to the emotional weight of a soldier's life that Anakin carried with him. He saw countless lives lost in what felt like pointless battles. The Council's unwavering certainty only served to increase his doubt, and all the while, a silent puppet master watched and waited. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine was a constant presence in Anakin's life. He was a trusted confidant, a paternal figure who offered advice and praise that the Jedi Council would not. He lauded Anakin's courage and boldness, validating the very traits the Jedi feared. He provided a stark contrast to the distant and often critical demeanor of masters like Mace Windu and Mundi. Palpatine saw through Anakin's bravado to the deep insecurities and longing for approval beneath. He exploited Anakin's growing disillusionment with the Jedi, subtly poisoning his mind with the idea that the Council was holding him back, that they did not trust his power or his unique perspective. This insidious manipulation was Palpatine's greatest weapon. He didn't force Anakin to the dark side. He simply showed him a path he was already unconsciously walking. Palpatine spoke, a language that Anakin understood, a language of ambition, power, and the will to protect those you love. The Clone Wars provided the perfect breeding ground for Anakin's dark tendencies to grow. The constant violence and the gray morality of war normalized acts that would have been unthinkable in a time of peace. He became a hardened warrior, quick to use force to solve problems, a trait that the Jedi Council grudgingly tolerated for the sake of victory. But this was not just a professional transformation. It was a psychological one. The relentless stress and the constant moral compromises began to wear away at his inner light. He was forced to make difficult choices, to sacrifice lives, and to commit acts that he would have once considered antithetical to the Jedi way. These moments, while often strategically necessary, chipped away at his conscience and made the later, darker acts of his life seem less impossible. One of the most significant and profound events of this period was the mission to the ethereal realm of Mortis. Lured there by a mysterious distress signal, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka found themselves in a dimension outside of normal space and time, a place where the Force was alive and sentient. Mortis was inhabited by three celestial beings: the benevolent, daughter who represented the light side, the malevolent son who represented the dark side, and their father who struggled to maintain the cosmic balance between them. The father, sensing Anakin's immense power, revealed his true purpose: to test if Anakin was truly the chosen one who could contain his powerful children and take his place as the keeper of the balance. The experience was a metaphysical mirror reflecting Anakin's inner turmoil. The sun, representing the dark side, showed Anakin a horrifying vision of his future as Darth Vader, a future where he would kill his own master and become a pawn of the Emperor. The vision was so visceral and so terrifying that it filled Anakin with a desperate need to avoid that fate. Simultaneously, the son preyed on his deepest fear, the fear of loss. He lured Ahsoka to the dark side. In a desperate act to save her, Anakin allowed himself to be momentarily consumed by the dark side. To confront the son, he succeeded in saving Ahsoka's life, but was left shaken by the ease with which he had embraced the darkness. He had seen the ultimate power of the dark side and had been tempted by its promise. The father, in a final act of desperation, wiped Anakin's memory of the vision of his future. But the experience left an indelible mark on his subconscious. Mortis Arc was a devastating blow to Anakin's psyche. It confirmed his identity as the chosen one, but also revealed the terrifying price of that destiny. It showed him that the darkness was not an external threat, but an internal struggle, a constant battle between the light and dark sides of his own soul. The Jedi had warned him about this, but he had never truly understood it until he saw the full horror of his potential self. The mission also reinforced his deep-seated fear of losing Padmé Ahsoka, a fear that the son had masterfully exploited. He returned from Mortis with a renewed sense of purpose, but also with a gnawing anxiety that would make him vulnerable to Palpatine's influence. By the end of the Clone Wars, Anakin Skywalker had become a legend, but he was a legend with a broken soul. He was a war hero who had lost his faith in the institution he served. He was a Jedi who was in a constant state of rebellion against his own code. He was a husband living a double life, and he was a man who, in his desperation to protect those he loved, was becoming more and more like the very darkness he was sworn to destroy. His rise as a hero was complete, but it had come at a terrible price. The stage was now set for the final devastating chapter of Anakin's hero's journey. His rise was almost complete, but the shadow of his fall was already spreading, promising to engulf not just him, but the entire galaxy. The Jedi were the ones that caused all this. Chapter 4: The Ahsoka Incident. Betrayal and disillusionment of the Jedi Order. The prophecy of the Chosen One had always been a source of both hope and suspicion within the Jedi Order. Its subject, Anakin Skywalker, was destined to be at the center of this tension. From the moment he first set foot in the Jedi Temple, he was treated as an anomaly, a problem to be managed rather than a student to be taught. The Council's initial refusal to train him, based on their fear of his age, and his deep-seated attachments, set the precedent for a lifetime of distrust. It was a cold, formal judgment that ignored the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn's final dying wish. This wasn't an act of malice, but one of profound institutional fear. The Jedi Order, for all its wisdom, was terrified of what it could not control. In Anakin, they saw a force of nature that defied their rigid traditions. His acceptance was only a begrudging compromise, a half measure that was a far cry from a true embrace. This left him feeling like an outsider from day one, This initial rejection was just the first of many subtle and not-so-subtle slights. As a Padawan, Anakin possessed a raw, intuitive connection to the Force that often manifested as impulsive actions. While other Padawans trained for years to achieve a level of skill, Anakin's mastery seemed to come to him effortlessly, almost instinctively. He could pilot a starfighter with an unmatched finesse, effortlessly outmaneuvering experienced pilots. He could strategize with an unorthodox brilliance that often flummoxed his superiors. But rather than celebrate this unique talent, the Council viewed it with deep suspicion. They saw not genius, but a dangerous recklessness. They mistrusted his passion, viewing it as a gateway to the dark side. In their eyes, his confidence was arrogance, his courage was pride, and his profound capacity for love was a dangerous weakness. That needed to be rooted out. They had a rigid, ancient framework for what a Jedi should be. Anakin, with his chaotic power and emotional depth, simply did not fit. The Jedi, in their attempts to shape him into their ideal, only succeeded in alienating him further. The Clone Wars only amplified this friction. While Anakin became a war hero, celebrated for his bravery and his tactical brilliance, the Jedi Council's suspicion never waned. He was consistently held back, denied the rank of master that his accomplishments had clearly earned. The Council's reasoning was steeped in their old fears, his powerful attachments and his perceived arrogance. They saw the public's love for him as a dangerous distraction and his unconventional methods as a threat to their established doctrines. This systematic disrespect was a constant, low-level hum in his life, a wound that festered over time and which Palpatine masterfully exploited. The Jedi wanted him to be their weapon in the war, but they never truly wanted him to be one of them. The feeling of being held back and unappreciated, despite his immense contributions, created a deep-seated resentment that made him vulnerable to the Chancellor's manipulations. The distrust reached its boiling point during the Ahsoka incident. Ahsoka Tano, Anakin's Padawan and the closest thing he had to a family, was framed for a bombing at the Jedi Temple. Despite a lack of credible evidence and the clear signs of a setup, the Jedi Council moved with cold, detached cynicism. They saw a convenient scapegoat and took the path of least resistance. In a move that underscored their hypocrisy, they publicly expelled Ahsoka from the Jedi Order, stripping her of her rights and leaving her to fend for herself. They handed her case over to the Republic Military Court, where she would be tried by the ruthless and anti-Jedi Admiral Tarkin. This was a profound and public betrayal of one of their own, an act that prioritized political optics and institutional preservation over justice and trust. For Anakin, this was a moment of complete and utter disillusionment. He had fought and bled for the Jedi Order, but in their moment of need, they had abandoned his little sister without a second thought. Their rigid adherence to protocol and their profound lack of faith in Ahsoka's character shattered the last remnants of his trust in them. He was driven by a deep, powerful need to clear her name, a need that the Jedi Council, with their cold adherence to rules, could not understand. He risked everything, going on a rogue mission to uncover the truth. His desperate search led him to the true culprit, Ahsoka's friend Barriss's Offee, who confessed to the crime. Barriss's confession was a scathing indictment of the Jedi Order itself. Her words resonated with the anger and disillusionment simmering within Anakin. She argued that the Jedi had lost their way, that they were hypocrites who had abandoned their principles for the sake of war, Anakin returned to the Jedi Temple with the truth, expecting the Council to welcome Ahsoka back with open arms. Instead, they offered a lukewarm apology for their lapse in judgment. They did not acknowledge the profound injustice they had inflicted. Ahsoka, in a moment of clarity and maturity far beyond her years, refused to rejoin the Order. She told Anakin that she could not return to a place that no longer trusted her, that she had defined her own path. Her departure was a devastating blow to Anakin. It was a direct consequence of the Jedi's failure, a visible scar that proved they were not the paragons of light he had believed them to be. The Jedi had feared his attachments, but it was their own lack of attachment, their coldness and rigid adherence to a flawed code, that ultimately drove him away. He was a hero with no home and no one to truly trust. Chapter 5. The Forbidden's Love. Padmé, the Path to Darkness. Anakin Skywalker's life was a constant exercise in compartmentalization. He was the celebrated Jedi General, a war hero with a reputation for both brilliance and recklessness. He was a trusted mentor to Ahsoka Tano, a brother-in-arms to Obi-Wan Kenobi. But he was also a man living a secret life, one driven by an attachment so powerful and so forbidden that it would ultimately become the primary catalyst for his downfall. This secret life revolved entirely around Padmé Amidala, the former Queen of Naboo, who represented everything the Jedi Code told him to abandon. From their first reunion as young adults, their connection was immediate and profound. Padmé saw the passionate, vulnerable boy beneath the Jedi robes, a boy who was still traumatized by his past as a slave and haunted by the loss of his mother. Anakin, in turn, saw in her a warmth and a kindness that was utterly absent from the sterile, formal world of the Jedi Order. Their conversations were not about war or politics, but about love, dreams, and a life outside of their respective duties. Their secret marriage on Naboo, a beautiful and dangerous act of defiance, solidified their bond. It created a deep internal schism within Anakin. Publicly, he was a Jedi Knight, dedicated to a life of service and non-attachment. Privately, he was a husband deeply and passionately in love, and consumed by the fear of losing the one person who truly understood him. This secret romance became Palpatine's greatest tool. The Chancellor, a master manipulator, had been grooming Anakin for years, but the love for Padmé gave him the ultimate leverage. Palpatine never condemned Anakin's feelings. Instead, he praised them. He spoke of love as a source of strength, contrasting it with the Jedi's cold, unfeeling philosophy. He planted the idea that the Jedi were jealous of Anakin's power and his capacity for love, that they would try to control or even destroy his relationship with Padmé if they ever discovered it. Palpatine positioned himself as the only one who truly understood Anakin's plight, a father figure who encouraged the very emotions the Jedi forbade. The final, fatal element of this chapter was the return of Anakin's nightmares. He began to have vivid premonitions of Padmé dying in childbirth. These dreams were not vague, abstract fears. They were visceral, terrifying visions that brought him to the brink of despair. In his desperation, he sought counsel from Master Yoda, revealing his fears without betraying the identity of the person he was having the visions about. Yoda's advice was classic Jedi doctrine: train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. But for Anakin, who had already failed to save his mother, this was an unbearable cruelty. The trauma of his mother's death had created a deep-seated fear of loss. The Jedi's cold advice only made it worse. He could not accept a fate he had already lived through once. He was consumed by an all-consuming desperation to find a way to save her, no matter the cost. This desperation, rooted in his love for Padme, was the final stage of Palpatine's manipulation. The Sith Lord had prepared the perfect trap. He began to allude to the forbidden powers of the dark side, of a knowledge so profound that it could defy death itself. He told Anakin the legend of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Sith Lord who had such a powerful command over the Force that he could prevent the ones he cared about from dying. This promise, a direct answer to Anakin's greatest fear, was an irresistible lure. The very attachment the Jedi feared was now a rope Palpatine used to pull Anakin directly into his grasp. Anakin's love for Padme, which should have been his greatest strength, was poisoned by his fear and manipulated by a master of deceit. He was no longer fighting for the light. He was fighting for his love, and he was willing to descend into the deepest darkness to save her. The duality of Anakin's life was more than just a secret. It was a constant source of mental and emotional stress. Every time he went on a mission, a part of him was terrified he might not return to Padme. Every time he spoke with a Jedi Master, he was paranoid they would discover his secret. This constant state of anxiety and secrecy made him emotionally isolated and dependent on the only two people who knew his truth, Padme and Palpatine. The moment of truth arrived when Palpatine finally revealed his true identity. He confessed to Anakin that he was Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who the Jedi had been searching for. For a fleeting moment, Anakin did not immediately fall to the dark side. Instead, in a testament to his remaining loyalty to the light, he chose to report Palpatine to the Jedi Council. He went to Mace Windu, the one Jedi Master who had been most openly critical of him, and revealed the Chancellor's identity. But even in this moment of doing the right thing, the Jedi's distrust of Anakin was absolute. Windu, suspicious and cold, ordered Anakin to remain behind, fearing his instability and potential to betray them. This was a final, critical betrayal. Anakin had done the Jedi's work, discovered the Sith Lord, and shown his loyalty, only to be dismissed and left out of the most important mission of his life. He watched as Mace Windu and 3 other Jedi Masters went to confront Palpatine, feeling utterly powerless and alone. When he arrived at the Chancellor's office, he didn't find a clear-cut confrontation. He found a brutal duel with Mace Windu, on the verge of killing Palpatine. In that moment, Anakin's fear of losing Padme overwhelmed him. Mace Windu, the symbol of the Jedi's cold, unyielding nature, was about to kill the one person who had promised to save her. Anakin's love for Padme, poisoned by his fear and stoked by Palpatine's lies, forced a final tragic choice. He was ready to betray everything he stood for to save the woman he loved. The stage was set for the final brutal transformation from Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader. Chapter 6: The Fall. A desperate deal with the devil. Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side was not a sudden plunge, but a long, agonizing descent. Its climax was a moment of profound moral chaos. All the years of Jedi distrust, his secret life, with Padme and the knowing fear of her death converged in Supreme Chancellor Palpatine's office. This was the point of no return. The moment Anakin's love and desperation finally overwhelmed his allegiance to the light. When Anakin arrived, he found a brutal, chaotic duel in progress. Mace Windu and 3 other Jedi Masters had cornered Palpatine, exposing him as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. The duel was swift and deadly, with Palpatine quickly dispatching the other Masters. But he was ultimately outmatched by Mace Windu. The Jedi Master had Palpatine defeated, his lightsaber poised to deliver the final blow. But in this moment, Palpatine's theatrics were at their most cunning. He feigned weakness, begging for Anakin to intervene, claiming the Jedi were the true villains. He pointed to Windu's uncompromising act of a public execution as proof of the Jedi's descent into darkness. For Anakin, this scene was a devastating paradox. On one hand, he saw the Jedi Master he had always mistrusted about to commit a cold, non-Jedi act of revenge. On the other hand, he saw the one man who had promised to save his wife on the brink of death. Mace Windu's unwavering belief in the Jedi Code, which had consistently held Anakin back, was now manifesting as an act that would kill the only person who offered a solution to his deepest fear. In that instant, Anakin had a choice to make: trust the Jedi who had repeatedly failed him, or trust the man who offered the power to save Padme. His decision was not a choice for evil, but a tragic, misguided act of love. He shouted, "You can't kill him. He's the only one who can save my wife." He then did the unthinkable. With a single desperate swing of his lightsaber, he severed Mace Windu's hand, disarming him and leaving him vulnerable to Palpatine's lethal Force lightning. In that moment, a Jedi killed a Jedi. It was a betrayal so profound that the very foundations of the light side of the Force seemed to tremble. With Windu's body falling to the depths of Coruscant, the last flicker of Anakin, Skywalker's soul died. The act had been so heinous, the betrayal so complete, that there was no going back. Palpatine, no longer feigning weakness, stood and looked at Anakin with a chilling grin. He solidified Anakin's transformation by giving him a new name, a name that was not a title but a prison. Darth Vader. The name was a symbol of his new identity, a permanent severance from his past, the new Dark Lord of the Sith. His eyes burning with the Sith's distinctive yellow hue was then given his first command: go and do what must be done. Do not hesitate. Show no mercy. This command was the grim culmination of Palpatine's plan. It was the execution of Order 66, a secret contingency plan to wipe out the Jedi Order. Anakin's first act as Vader was to lead a legion of clone troopers into the Jedi Temple, a place that was once his home, and slaughter everyone within, including the defenseless younglings. The chilling efficiency and brutal finality of this act confirmed his descent. He had become the very monster he had feared, a man consumed by the dark side, using his immense power to commit an act of unforgivable evil. His fall was complete. The transition from Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader was marked by a series of escalating, horrific acts, each one more shocking than the last. He did not simply turn. He performed a ritualistic cleansing of his past self, with each murder severing another thread of his old identity. To become Darth Vader, Anakin had to prove his loyalty to the dark side. Palpatine had convinced him that the Jedi were a threat to his new power, an obstacle in his quest to save Padme. By killing them, he was not just carrying out a command. He was proving his commitment to the dark path, a path he now believed was the only way to save the one he loved. The massacre at the Jedi Temple was crucial. It was an act so heinous that it would prevent any possibility of a return. The murder of the younglings was not just an act of cruelty. It was a final, terrible severing of his past. The younglings represented the innocence, the potential, and the future of the Jedi Order, the very things Anakin had once embodied. By killing them, he was killing the last vestiges of his former self. He was performing a dark ritual, shedding his old skin and fully embracing his new identity. Palpatine, the master of psychological manipulation, knew that a clean break was necessary. The Jedi had to be seen not as victims, but as an enemy of the new Empire. And a Jedi Knight's betrayal would be the most effective propaganda. This was all for Padme. In Anakin's twisted mind, every life he took was a down payment on her salvation. He believed that the more he embraced the dark side, the more powerful he would become, and the more likely he was to learn the secret to saving her. The Jedi had told him to let go and accept her death. The Sith offered him a way to cheat it. He was not motivated by a desire for power for its own sake, but by a desperate, all-consuming love that had been corrupted into a tool of destruction. He was willing to sacrifice the entire galaxy if it meant he could prevent his nightmares from coming true. The final, chilling sequence of the Jedi Temple raid shows a machine-like efficiency and a cold, emotionless determination. The man who had once risked everything for his friends was now a soulless automaton, carrying out a terrible act of genocide. His yellow eyes, now a permanent fixture of his gaze, were a reflection of the darkness that had finally consumed him. He had chosen the path of control over the path of compassion, the path of power over the path of love, all in the desperate hope of cheating fate. The fall was complete. The galaxy's greatest hero was now its greatest monster, driven by a corrupted love that would ultimately destroy everything he held dear. Chapter 7. The Enforcer. The Dark Lord rises. The fall was complete. The Jedi Order lay in ruins. The Jedi Temple a smoldering monument to a betrayal of galactic proportions. Anakin Skywalker was gone, replaced by a new chilling identity. Darth Vader, the enforcer of the nascent galactic empire. This chapter explores the immediate aftermath of his turn, a period defined by a cold, merciless efficiency and the terrifying psychological and physical transformation that stripped him of his former self. The transition from Anakin to Vader was not merely a change in allegiance. It was a full-scale psychological and spiritual reconstruction. The man who had been defined by his passions, his love for Padme, his bond with Obi-Wan, his connection to the clone troopers. He had been emotionally severed. The yellow eyes that burned with the Sith's fury were a reflection of a soul in turmoil, a being consumed by rage, self-loathing, and the constant fear of losing the one thing he had sacrificed everything for. He was driven by a single-minded focus: to master the dark side and gain the power to save Padme, a promise that Emperor Palpatine had dangled before him. The love that had once been his greatest strength was now his most potent poison, twisting his every action and corrupting his very essence. Vader's first missions as the Emperor's Fist were acts of brutal, unapologetic cleansing. He and his new legion of stormtroopers were dispatched to various corners of the galaxy to hunt down and eliminate the surviving Jedi. This was not a Jedi-style manhunt. It was a ruthless execution. He knew their fighting styles, their hiding places, and their weaknesses. He was the ultimate Jedi hunter, a being of pure, unadulterated power and single-minded purpose. For Vader, Each Jedi he killed was not just a target. It was an act of erasing his past. He was destroying the very world he once inhabited, a world that had betrayed him and failed him at every turn. In his mind, he was justified. The Jedi, in his new, twisted reality, were an obsolete and corrupt order that needed to be purged for the good of the galaxy. He rationalized every murder as a necessary step towards a greater power, a power that he believed would ultimately save Padmé and bring about a new, more perfect order. The psychological toll of these actions was immense. To sustain his newfound power, Vader had to embrace his hatred and suppress every flicker of compassion. He became a living paradox, a being driven by a corrupted love, yet fueled by a profound and all-consuming hatred. This internal conflict manifested as an immense power, but it came at the cost of his humanity. He was no longer a person with emotions, but an extension of Palpatine's will, a cold, calculating enforcer of a new tyrannical order. The ghost of Anakin Skywalker was now trapped within a prison of his own making, a living tomb of metal. And hatred. The physical transformation into the iconic Sith Lord began shortly after his fall. The duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi on the fiery world of Mustafar would leave him grievously injured, his body broken and charred by the volcanic landscape. This was a tragedy of epic proportions, a brother against brother duel that ended with Obi-Wan walking away in heartbroken defeat, leaving his best friend to die. But Palpatine, the ultimate puppeteer, arrived just in time to save him. Vader was rebuilt with a terrifying, life-sustaining armor suit. A mask was not just a piece of armor. It was a prison, a constant physical reminder of his failure, and a symbol of his new identity. The raspy breathing, the mechanical movements, the sterile environment of the suit. All of it was designed to keep him in a state of constant pain and isolation. He was no longer a man. He was a machine, a tool forged by his master. Palpatine, in his ultimate display of cruelty and control, had orchestrated everything to ensure that Vader would be completely dependent on him. The suit was designed to be his life support system, constant source of agony that would prevent him from ever truly healing and force him to rely on the dark side for power. The Emperor had taken a broken hero and turned him into a living weapon, a walking monument to his own genius and malice. The very suit that kept him alive was also his greatest punishment, a daily reminder of his mistakes and his broken body. The agony fueled his rage, and his rage fueled his connection to the dark side. Now a being of pure rage and power, Darth Vader's first major action was to consolidate the Emperor's new galactic empire. He led military campaigns, crushed rebellions, and struck fear into the hearts of any who dared to oppose him. He was a symbol of absolute power, a terrifying figure of legend who was said to have killed the Jedi. He was a perfect tool for the Emperor, a weapon that could be unleashed without question or hesitation. He was an instrument of galactic terror, enforcing Palpatine's will with cold, brutal efficiency. His fame and power grew exponentially, but it was a hollow power, a gilded cage, built on the bones of his past. The ghost of Anakin Skywalker was never truly gone. It was buried deep within the machine, suppressed by the dark side, but it was still there. The love for Padmé, the love that had led to his fall, was still some source of immense pain. He was a man who had sacrificed his entire identity for a promise that he still had to fulfill. He was a man with a colossal, gaping void in his soul, a void that he tried to fill with power and rage. But no amount of power could heal the wounds he had inflicted upon himself. The Enforcer, the Dark Lord of the Sith, was not a person of his own free will, but a chained and broken man, forever a slave to his master and his past. Chapter 8. The Machine's Regret. The Haunting of Darth Vader. The fiery crucible of Mustafar forged Darth Vader, but it did not extinguish the man he once was. The period between his rise to power in Revenge of the Sith and his reign of terror. In A New Hope was a time of immense psychological turmoil, a constant and brutal struggle between the machine and the man trapped within. The iconic black armor that was meant to be a symbol of his power was in reality a mobile coffin, a physical manifestation of his self-loathing and a constant reminder of the life he had destroyed. The first and most enduring source of Vader's pain was the loss of Padme. He had sacrificed everything: his friends, his master, his soul, for a promise of power that ultimately failed to save her. When Palpatine revealed that Padme had died, a part of Vader was irrevocably broken. The rage he had built his new identity on, the hatred he had cultivated, was now a meaningless void. He had traded his entire existence for a love that was now gone. He was left with nothing but his agony. This profound sense of failure and regret was a constant presence in his mind, a silent scream that no amount of power could drown out. He was a man-turned-monster, projecting his inner pain onto the galaxy. Vader's life in this period was an unending exercise in torment. The suit itself was a form of physical and mental punishment. Designed by Palpatine, it was a cumbersome, painful contraption that kept him alive but never allowed him to be at peace. The raspy breathing, a sound that would come to define his terrifying presence, was a constant reminder of his broken body. The isolation of the suit, its sterile, life-supporting embrace, trapped him in a hell of his own making, cut off from any true connection or comfort. He was a living paradox, a being of immense power, yet utterly helpless without his life support system. This dependency on Palpatine for his very existence was a cruel masterstroke of control that, to cope with this torment, Vader became a figure of unimaginable brutality. He did not simply enforce the Emperor's will. He did so with a level of cold, emotionless efficiency that terrified even his own subordinates. He would execute officers for minor failures, choke insubordinate admirals with a flick of his wrist, and strike down any who questioned his authority. This cruelty was not a sign of pure evil, but a defense mechanism, a way to bury the Anakin Skywalker that still haunted him. Every act of violence, every display of power, was an attempt to silence the ghost of his past, the memory of a kind boy who had once loved and lost. He was a man-turned-monster, projecting his inner pain onto the galaxy. Obi-Wan Kenobi also loomed large in Vader's consciousness. He was the one person who knew him as Anakin Skywalker, the brother who had betrayed him. The hatred he felt for his former master was a powerful and constant force, but it was a hatred laced with a deep and profound regret. He saw every defeat as a personal failure to live up to the Jedi he once was, and every victory as a confirmation of the evil he had become. The knowledge that Obi-Wan was still out there, a living reminder of his past, was a source of both torment and a driving obsession. This period was a time of internal war for Vader. He was an incredibly powerful Sith Lord, but he was also a broken man, struggling with an immense sense of failure and regret. He had chosen the path of power to save the woman he loved, But he had lost her, and in the process lost himself. The man-turned-machine had buried his humanity, but he could never truly escape it. The ghost of Anakin Skywalker was always there, waiting in the darkness of his mind. A silent, painful reminder of the light he had so tragically abandoned. The years between episodes 3 and 4 were not just a period of personal torment for Vader, but also a relentless campaign of galactic subjugation. He became the face of the Empire's terror, a boogeyman in a black suit. His primary directive, in addition to consolidating Palpatine's power, was the eradication of any remaining Jedi. This mission was more than just a job. It was an obsession. For Vader, hunting down Jedi was a perverse ritual of self-punishment and a way to prove his commitment to his new master. He hunted them with a chilling efficiency, using his intimate knowledge of their fighting styles, their philosophy, and their hideouts. Each Jedi he killed was a part of his past he was trying to bury, a piece of himself he was trying to destroy. One of his most significant hunts was for Ahsoka Tano, his former Padawan. Their confrontation, years after her departure from the Order, was a deeply tragic moment. Ahsoka, who had forged her own path away from the Jedi and was now a leader in the Rebel Alliance, was shocked to discover her old master's true identity. Vader's cold, merciless attacks on her were not just those of an enemy, but a former mentor lashing out in pain. In his mind, she represented a life he could have had, a life of purpose and peace. Her defiance was a painful reminder of his own failed choices. His line, "Anakin Skywalker was weak. I destroyed him," was not just a statement of fact, but a desperate attempt to convince himself of a lie. The duel was a poignant reflection of his internal struggle. A dark, powerful machine trying to crush the last, painful remnants of the man who once cared for her. For all his power and terror, Vader was not his own master. He was Palpatine's most valuable tool, a chained beast of immense power. Their relationship was a twisted reflection of a master and apprentice, built not on respect or shared goals, but on control and dependency. Palpatine kept Vader in a state of constant physical and psychological pain, ensuring his rage and reliance on the dark side never waned. He was never allowed to fully heal, his suit a constant source of agony. The Emperor would often test Vader's loyalty, pitting him against rivals and even setting traps to ensure his subservience. He deliberately kept Vader in the dark about many of his grand plans, using him as a blunt instrument of terror while reserving the true power for himself. Vader's greatest strength was his immense power, but his greatest weakness was his unshakable belief that Palpatine held the key to his salvation. The suit itself was a literal torture device, meticulously designed to prevent Vader from ever experiencing a moment of peace. The boots were too small, the armor plates chafed against his scarred skin, and the internal life support systems were calibrated to cause constant, low-level pain. Every breath he took was a conscious effort, a mechanical process that reminded him of his broken body. The very air he breathed was filtered through a system that left him in perpetual discomfort. Palpatine's brilliant cruelty ensured that Vader could never escape his physical agony, which in turn forced him to draw upon his hatred to survive. The suit was a physical representation of his psychological prison, a cage of metal and pain. It was a constant, excruciating reminder of his choices and his broken state in this period. Vader's quest for power and his regret over his past were inextricably linked. He was trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. Each violent act meant to bury the past, but only serving to keep it hauntingly alive. The man who had once been a hero was now a prisoner, his heart a gaping wound that could not be healed. His mind a battlefield where the ghost of Anakin Skywalker would never stop screaming. His life was a testament to the tragic consequences of a corrupted love. A love that had promised to save him, but instead condemned him to an existence of eternal torment. Chapter 9. The Last Hope. The Rise of Luke Skywalker. For nearly 2 decades, the galaxy lived under the iron fist of the Galactic Empire. The Jedi were a forgotten myth, the Republic a distant memory, and the face of the New Order was the terrifying, black-armored enforcer, Darth Vader. The ghost of Anakin Skywalker was buried deep within the machine. But a new hope, a new hero, was growing on a remote desert planet, unaware of his lineage or his destiny. This hero was Luke Skywalker, the son Vader didn't know he had. Luke's life on Tatooine was a stark contrast to his father's. He was a humble farm boy, a young man dreaming of adventure and a life beyond the twin suns. He was raised by his aunt and uncle, Owen and Garu Lars, who, at the behest of Obi-Wan Kenobi, had kept his true parentage a secret. Their cautious, protective nature was driven by a deep fear that Luke would follow in his father's footsteps. This shielded upbringing, however, did not extinguish the force that was strong within him. It manifested not as a destructive power, but as a deep desire for something more, a yearning for purpose, and a connection to a world he had only read about. The turning point in Luke's life came with the arrival of 2 droids, R2-D2 and C-3PO. R2-D2 carried a desperate plea from Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan, a message meant for an old Jedi Master named Obi-Wan Kenobi. This message, a beacon of light in the darkness, set Luke on an adventure that would change his life forever. He found Obi-Wan, who revealed to him the truth, at least a version of it. Obi-Wan told Luke that his father, Anakin Skywalker, had been a great Jedi Knight who had been betrayed and murdered by Darth Vader. This narrative, a necessary lie to protect Luke from a terrible truth, planted the seed of a future confrontation. Under the guidance of Obi-Wan, Luke began his training. He was a natural, his connection to the Force so strong that it was almost instinctive. His first steps with a lightsaber, a weapon he had only heard about in stories, were clumsy but full of potential. Obi-Wan saw in him the same raw power and passion that had defined his father, but he also saw profound innocence and a lack of the deep-seated trauma that had corrupted Anakin. Luke's journey was a hero's journey in its most classic sense, an ordinary boy called to a great destiny. But what made his story so unique was that his great adversary was a being who was a direct reflection of himself, a man who had chosen the wrong path. The death of Obi-Wan Kenobi at the hands of Darth Vader was a devastating blow for Luke, but it was also a crucial turning point. It was a direct consequence of his actions, and it filled him with a powerful mix of grief and a burning desire for justice. His path was now clear. He was to become a Jedi Knight, to fight for the Rebel Alliance, and to avenge his father. But his journey to becoming a Jedi was not just a quest for power or revenge. It was a path of self-discovery. He was searching not just for the Force, but for the truth about his past and his place in the galaxy. He was the last hope, the final chance for the light side of the Force to triumph over the darkness. And he was completely unaware that the man he was fighting was the very father he was seeking to avenge. Chapter 10. The Return of the Jedi. Redemption and Sacrifice. For 2 decades, the name Anakin Skywalker was a ghost, a whisper lost in the monstrous shadow of Darth Vader. His story, a tragedy of corrupted love and immense power, had reached its final desperate act. But the cycle of darkness was about to be broken, not by a legendary Jedi Master, but by the love of a son who refused to give up on his father. Luke Skywalker was unlike any Jedi before him. He was not raised in the cold, detached halls of the Jedi Temple, but in the warmth of a family, albeit a broken one. This upbringing gave him a profound capacity for love and a deep-seated belief in redemption, qualities that the Jedi Order had long discouraged. When he faced Vader for the final time in the Emperor's throne room, he was not there to fight or to kill, but to save. He saw the man beneath the mask, the man his father had once been. He saw the pain and regret that had haunted Vader for a lifetime. He believed there was still good in him, a flicker of light that had never been truly extinguished. This unwavering faith was Luke's greatest strength, a strength the Jedi had never understood. The final confrontation was a psychological war as much as it was a physical one. Emperor Palpatine, reveling in his triumph, orchestrated the duel between father and son, hoping to goad Luke into a fit of rage and turn him to the dark side. He watched with a twisted glee as Vader, burdened by the ghost of his past, fought his son. The duel ended not with a victory, but with a plea. Luke, with his lightsaber at Vader's throat, saw the truth in a flash of clarity. He looked at Vader's mechanical hand, a reflection of his own prosthetic, and realized they were one and the same. He saw the path his father had taken and chose a different one. He threw his weapon aside, declaring, "I am a Jedi, like my father. Before me." He was not only rejecting the dark side, but he was also affirming his faith in the man who was once a hero. Luke's declaration was the final, critical blow to Vader's armor. It broke through the years of self-imposed hatred and Palpatine's manipulation. Palpatine, enraged by Luke's defiance, began to torture him with a torrent of Force lightning. In that moment, Vader was faced with a choice that echoed his first fatal mistake. He had a chance to save someone he loved from the Emperor's cruelty. He had once stood by and let the Emperor destroy Padme, and he would not let him do the same to Luke. The love that had been his downfall was now his salvation. He saw the pain in his son's eyes, and in them he saw the light and innocence that had been stripped from his own. The memories of his past Padme's love, Obi-Wan's friendship, and the Jedi he had betrayed rushed back to him, but this time they were not a source of pain, but a source of strength. With a final heroic effort, he grabbed the Emperor and threw him into the Death Star's reactor core, destroying the master who had corrupted him and saving his son. This act of sacrifice was the ultimate sign of his redemption. He had brought balance to the Force, not as a Jedi, but as a father. The story of Anakin Skywalker is a timeless tragedy, a saga of immense potential, catastrophic failure, and ultimate redemption. His life mirrors that of a fallen angel, a being of pure light corrupted by temptation and cast out of paradise. He was born of the Force, destined to bring balance, but his journey was a descent into a hell of his own making. Fueled by fear and manipulation, Anakin's fall was not a sudden act of evil, but a gradual erosion of his character, worn down by the very system he was meant to serve. He was a hero who was constantly held back, a compassionate man who was taught to suppress his emotions, and a loving husband who was forced to live a lie. The Jedi, in their rigid adherence to a flawed doctrine, feared his attachments, but it was their own coldness and lack of trust that created the perfect environment for Palpatine's poison to take root. The love he had for Padma, a love that should have been his greatest strength, was twisted into a desperate, all-consuming fear of loss, a fear that drove him to commit unforgivable acts. The transformation into Darth Vader was the culmination of this tragedy. The black armor, a physical representation of his psychological torment, was a prison of his own making, a constant reminder of his failure and the life he had destroyed. For decades, he was a living tomb, a machine of pure hate and power, serving a master who had promised him everything and given him nothing but pain. He was a phantom of his former self, a legend of terror who was, in reality, a deeply broken and regretful man. But even in the deepest darkness, a spark of light can never be truly extinguished. That spark was his son, Luke Skywalker. Luke's unwavering belief in his father's goodness, a belief rooted in love rather than rigid doctrine, was the final key to his redemption. Luke was the son of a fallen angel, but he was also the son of a good man, and he saw a flicker of that goodness when no one else did. In his final moments, faced with the choice between his master and his son, Anakin Skywalker finally chose love over power. He sacrificed himself to save Luke, an act that redeemed his soul and fulfilled the prophecy he was born to carry out. His life was a testament to the tragic consequences of a corrupted love, but his death was a testament to the power of a love that endures. He was a hero, a villain, and ultimately, a redeemed soul who brought balance to the Force. He was Anakin Skywalker, the life of a slave, the chosen one. Thank you for watching.